I was still clutching my morning coffee when I heard the hiss, not the snake-like kind, not even the kind that tells you your cappuccino machine's about to explode, but the kind that makes your skin crawl because it sounds wrong in every possible way. The sound seemed to reach into my chest and squeeze. Something was very wrong. I followed the noise cautiously, stepping around the hedge that bordered my driveway, and that's when I saw her. There she was in all her floral blouse glory, bent over a gas line clearly marked with yellow caution tape and a bright metal tag reading "Emergency Feed. Do not touch. Karen," snipping away like she was trimming roses, except this time she was hacking through a high-pressure natural gas pipeline with a pair of giant landscaping scissors and a face full of self-righteous determination. I yelled. She didn't even flinch. She looked up, gave me the most condescending smile I've ever seen in my life, and said, "This ugly pipe was lowering the property value." She paused, then added with sickening sweetness, "You're welcome." The absurdity hit me so fast I almost choked on my coffee. Lowering property value? This wasn't a rusty mailbox or an old satellite dish. It was the main gas line feeding into the backup generator that powered half the neighborhood during emergencies, and we were heading into storm season. The generator wasn't just a convenience. It was critical infrastructure installed after the last 3-day blackout. It was a lifeline for several elderly residents and one homebound child with a medical ventilator. All that now risked going down the drain because Karen had declared herself the sidewalk beautification police. As I dropped the cup and ran toward her, she stumbled backward, finally noticing the hiss growing louder and the smell of gas thickening the air. "What have you done?" I demanded, motioning for her to move back. She scoffed and waved her hand, muttering something about men always overreacting. That was when it hit me. She didn't even know what she had cut. Her ignorance wasn't just dangerous. It was weaponized by her arrogance. She wasn't just being a busybody. She was playing roulette with people's lives. I called the gas company immediately, my hands shaking. The operator didn't wait. "Evacuate now." Within minutes, a truck rolled up with sirens flashing. A crew jumping out in full gear while I tried to explain that the person who cut the line was still standing nearby, watching them like they were invading her garden. When one of the techs informed her she just breached a high-pressure emergency gas conduit, she went pale. Then, in classic Karen fashion, flipped the script. "Well, if it was so important, why wasn't it buried deeper?" she snapped. One of the crew members, who looked like he'd seen one too many of these types, replied with the driest deadpan, "Because it's emergency infrastructure, ma'am. We need to access it quickly. Like today. The leak was capped in time, but the damage was already done. The pressure to the generator dropped to 0. Storm clouds were rolling in from the east, thick and angry. There was barely time to catch my breath before the first raindrops fell, and the power across the street blinked twice, then went out. The homes, especially those on our shared emergency grid, were already vulnerable. As I watched porch lights flicker off like falling dominoes, I had to face the fact that Karen hadn't just made a stupid decision. She potentially endangered lives. I went inside and pulled up the security footage. My house had 4 outdoor cameras, and by sheer dumb luck, one of them had captured her act from a perfect angle. There she was, her shadow stretching across the sidewalk, her floral print swaying with the breeze as she bent down, wrestled with the pipe, and snipped right through it with the flair of someone cutting the ribbon at a grand opening. I saved the footage to 3 different drives. Karen had no idea what she just stepped into, and the storm had only just begun, outside and inside. By nightfall, the rain was hammering rooftops like it was angry at the shingles. Street lights flickered until they died, and the silence became too loud to ignore. Across the neighborhood, people were lighting candles, flashlights cutting through dark rooms as uncertainty spread like wildfire. My phone buzzed with a neighborhood alert. The backup generator system had failed. No one knew why. I did. By then, the group chat was in chaos. "Is it just me, or is the generator not kicking in?" One neighbor typed, "My dad's oxygen tank is low. What's happening?" Another asked. I knew I had to say something, but it wasn't the kind of message you casually drop in a group thread. Still, I couldn't keep it to myself. I typed out a sentence, paused, deleted it, and rewrote it. Karen cut the main gas line this morning. I saw it happen. The dots of people typing back popped up like a fireworks show. What? Are you serious? This can't be real. One resident, Eliza, who lived directly next to the generator node and had a son with a rare neurological condition requiring refrigerated meds, responded with a chilling line. If my son gets sick tonight, I will personally sue her into the Stone Age. I didn't blame her. The power was still out when I stepped onto my porch with a flashlight. From across the street, I could see Karen's silhouette standing in her doorway, arms crossed, staring into the dark neighborhood like she was daring it to blame her. But the damage was beyond denial. Emergency services had already dispatched fire trucks to check homes with vulnerable residents, and I spotted the unmistakable glow of an ambulance's lights turning into our street. They weren't coming because someone was sick yet. They were coming because someone might be. As lightning sliced the sky and the wind began to howl, I realized something. This wasn't just another petty Karen moment. This wasn't about barking dogs, mailbox paint, or HOA fines for holiday decorations hung one day too early. This was bigger. Karen had crossed a line, a literal gas line, and now the whole neighborhood was standing in the fallout. And the worst part, she still didn't think she'd done anything wrong. The power didn't come back on that night, not for us anyway. Somewhere across town, the main grid stayed intact, but on our block, the homes powered by the backup generator remained eerily dark. The silence outside was punctuated only by the occasional thump of wind-blown debris hitting fences and the low, growing grumble of thunder that seemed to mock us from above. I tried to sleep, but every creak and gust jolted me awake, reminding me that Karen's impulsive act had unplugged an entire neighborhood. What kept me up wasn't just the blackout. It was the thought of what could have happened if the fire department hadn't responded in time. One stray spark, one exposed wire, one gas-heavy pocket, and we would have been reading about it in the morning news. If we'd made it that far. By morning, the storm had passed, but left a soggy aftermath. Fallen branches cluttered sidewalks, trash bins lay flipped in the street, and puddles mirrored the cloudy sky. The group chat was ablaze. People had gone a full night without power, and several homes experienced issues that could have been prevented with the generator running. One elderly woman's stair lift stopped mid-climb, and her daughter had to sleep on the steps with her. A diabetic neighbor's insulin had warmed past the safe point. A child who relied on a feeding pump had to be rushed to a relative's house across town at midnight. These weren't mild inconveniences. They were serious risks. Everyone knew it, and they all wanted to know the same thing. What was going to be done about it? At around 10 in the morning, the HOA president called for an emergency meeting. I wasn't surprised. It was damage control mode. What did surprise me was the fact that Karen showed up, dressed in her usual beige slacks and pastel cardigan, like she was attending a book club, not a public inquisition. She waltzed in with a reusable coffee mug and that smug smile that made people want to throw things. The meeting was held at the clubhouse, still running on a separate generator that hadn't been affected. Chairs were packed with residents, some of them red-eyed from lack of sleep, others fuming with pent-up rage. When I walked in with a flash drive and laptop under my arm, all eyes turned to me. The HOA president, Dr. Marshall, tried to maintain control. He opened with a general statement about the unexpected technical difficulties, but someone shouted from the back, "Cut the crap." We all know what happened, and the crowd murmured in agreement. Dr. Marshall looked like he wanted to disappear into his clipboard. Karen sat stone-faced in the front row, sipping her coffee like she was above it all. That's when I stood up and connected my laptop to the projector. "I have footage of what happened," I said. The room hushed. On the screen, Karen's floral figure came into view, bending over the yellow-marked pipe with a pair of giant scissors. The silence in the room thickened as the recording played, her snip loud and final, the hiss following like a horror movie soundtrack. No one spoke. Even Karen froze for a split second, her eyes fixated on her own image on the screen. When the video ended, the room erupted. People shouted questions, accusations, even threats. One woman stood and demanded that the HOA cover her medical costs from last night. Another man said his basement sump pump failed, and he now had water damage. Dr. Marshall tried to regain order, but the room was spiraling. Karen stood slowly, placing her coffee on the floor, and raised her hand like she was in a school assembly. "Let me speak," she said. Miraculously, people quieted, more out of disbelief than respect. "I didn't know that pipe was important," she began, her voice droopy. "No one told me. I thought it was for someone's personal grill or something. Honestly, it looked awful and didn't meet the aesthetic standard I've been enforcing for years." A man in the front row barked out a laugh. "You've been enforcing? You're not the HOA dictator, Karen." Karen flushed but pressed on. "I think the real issue here is the lack of proper labeling and communication. If this infrastructure was so critical, why wasn't it underground or protected?" I acted with the best intentions for the neighborhood's appearance. The room turned ice cold. You could feel it. That line, "best intentions," was the wrong play. "You endangered lives," someone muttered. "You cut a marked gas line," someone else said louder. "People could have died, Karen." Dr. Marshall finally took the floor again, his face visibly shaken. Regardless of intentions, the gas line was city approved and clearly labeled. Tampering with utility infrastructure is a criminal offense. We've already been contacted by the city's public safety office, and they'll be conducting a full investigation. Karen's face twitched, and for the first time, the smugness cracked. I added, "And since I designed part of the generator grid as a consultant 2 years ago, I have the documentation that proves this pipe is a designated emergency supply line approved by the City Planning Commission. This wasn't an eyesore. This was a lifeline." That was when Eliza, whose son nearly had a medical emergency the night before, stood up. "I'm not waiting for the city. I'm filing a civil complaint. My lawyer says the footage alone is enough for reckless endangerment." Others quickly echoed her sentiment. It wasn't just about Karen anymore. It was about trust, safety, and the realization that one person's arrogance could hold an entire neighborhood hostage. And Karen, finally sensing the tide turning, began quietly collecting her things. She tried to leave without incident, but outside the clubhouse, several neighbors followed, peppering her with questions. Her only response was to mutter that people are too sensitive these days. One woman filmed the entire thing on her phone, narrating, "This is the woman who cut our gas line and shut down our generator during a storm. Say hi, Karen." The video would later circulate through multiple neighborhood threads and even made its way onto a local Facebook group titled HOA Madness. By evening, city workers arrived to inspect the pipeline and assess whether a replacement was immediately necessary. One of the engineers recognized me and confirmed the worst. The pipe Karen cut wasn't just part of our local generator. It was connected to a critical loop feeding a nearby school's auxiliary systems. Karen hadn't just endangered us. She jeopardized an entire zone marked for emergency priority in blackout scenarios. What had started as an act of aesthetic obsession had morphed into a multi-agency investigation. The neighborhood no longer viewed her as a nuisance. Now she was a liability with consequences. And the storm clouds overhead were nothing compared to the ones building in City Hall. The days that followed felt like a whirlwind spun straight from a courtroom drama, and a neighborhood gossip column had a messy baby. Karen, who had once strutted through the neighborhood like a self-appointed queen with an HOA handbook clutched tighter than a royal scepter, was now hiding behind drawn curtains. Her porch lights, usually a blinding display of white LEDs and passive-aggressive signage, were turned off. Her car sat untouched in the driveway, and no one had seen her out for her usual 6 a.m. jog and pastel workout gear. But what people had seen was the city inspector's truck parked in front of her house. Twice. The inspection wasn't just about the pipe anymore. It turned out the city's emergency services division had flagged our community on a larger grid because the generator Karen sabotaged didn't just serve us. It fed into a backup system connected to a nearby emergency shelter and an elementary school designated as a regional evacuation point. The gas line she cut was part of a public safety infrastructure upgrade from 2 years ago, and tampering with it was now being treated as interference with emergency systems. The words federal code violation were mentioned more than once, and suddenly everyone's interest skyrocketed beyond HOA drama into full-blown legal territory. Karen tried to regain control of the narrative by emailing a 6-paragraph manifesto to the entire community. In it, she claimed she had been targeted and misrepresented, and that her actions were based on visual assessments that raised reasonable concern about unmarked hazards. She wrote that she had every right to perform basic beautification on shared property, but the neighborhood had already seen the footage, her scissors, the deliberate snip, the arrogance. It was burned into everyone's minds. Her email was met with such a storm of replies, corrections, and angry screenshots that the HOA server had to temporarily disable the reply all functionality. Then came the unexpected escalation. A contractor named Victor, who had worked on Karen's landscaping project last spring, came forward. He claimed Karen had asked him to relocate a utility box behind her house because it clashed with her hedge line. He refused, stating that it was tied into the power management system for the community's lighting grid. Karen apparently fired him on the spot and made a veiled comment about doing it herself if nobody else had the spine. Victor's statement was enough for the city to start checking into more infrastructure violations. One afternoon, a group of utility company reps showed up with clipboards, blueprints, and serious expressions. They traced the entire pipeline layout along the sidewalk that bordered Karen's house, the one she had always called too industrial for a residential area. With my engineering background and familiarity with the install, I was asked to assist in identifying points of access and valve connections. What we found was a nightmare. Not only had Karen cut the main gas line, but she had also tampered with a secondary junction box that connected sensors used for automated leak detection. The tampering wasn't immediately obvious. It looked like an access panel had been unscrewed and loosely reattached, but when tested, the sensors had failed to respond to simulated leaks. Had the gas company not been alerted when I made the call during the incident, we might have gone hours without the system triggering a remote alarm. I watched the lead inspector jot something on his clipboard before muttering under his breath, "This is sabotage, not ignorance." The cherry on top came later that same day when one of the engineers tripped over a partially buried cable behind Karen's house and uncovered something unexpected. Hidden behind her back fence, concealed by overgrown bushes, was a dusty old maintenance van, no license plate, cracked windshield, and stuffed to the brim with what looked like city-owned items. There were traffic cones, meter readers, missing utility signs, even a broken solar-powered speed detector that had vanished from the nearby school zone last summer. They opened the back doors and found rows of confiscated neighborhood items. The wooden bench from the park that vanished during a cleanup week, the children at play signs Karen claimed had blown away, and a dozen LED light fixtures still in packaging. When word got out, the story transformed from a local disaster to a surreal tale of suburban madness. People gathered in small groups on porches and lawns, whispering theories and half joking about starting a documentary. Someone even posted a meme with Karen's face photoshopped over a Bond villain, captioned "License to Snip." It went semi-viral in the local neighborhood watch Facebook group. The city launched an official investigation. Utility reps took possession of the van and confirmed multiple serial numbers matched stolen or missing municipal assets. Karen, whether she realized it or not, was in a world of trouble, and yet she still hadn't said a word to anyone in person. No apology, no explanation, not even a whisper of remorse. That weekend, the HOA convened another meeting. This time it wasn't just about information. It was a tribunal. The board had received enough resident complaints and legal documentation to formally motion for Karen's removal from all HOA-related duties. The vote required a 2/3 majority. It wasn't even close. Every single homeowner, save for Karen's one remaining ally, a man named Pete who admitted he just liked her cookies, voted for her dismissal. What followed felt like poetic justice. Karen showed up late to the meeting, clearly not expecting the tide to have fully turned against her. When she heard the result, she went pale, then red, then that strange Karen shade of defensive denial. She tried to argue the vote was invalid, that her years of service meant something, that beautification was her calling, but no one was buying it, especially not when Dr. Marshall, who had previously tried to stay neutral, handed her a certified letter stating that she was under HOA suspension pending municipal and legal outcomes. By then, even Karen knew it was over. She stormed out of the clubhouse with her purse swinging violently, knocking over a potted plant someone had donated to brighten the meeting space. It shattered. No one moved to clean it up, not out of laziness, but out of stunned silence. It was symbolic. The plant, like Karen's authority, was wreckage now. The aftermath was bittersweet. Repairs to the generator system had already begun, with a new steel guard being installed around the vulnerable pipeline. The gas company pledged to reinforce all exposed connections, and the city granted the HOA emergency funds for further infrastructure improvement. But despite the progress, the sense of betrayal still lingered. The neighborhood had trusted Karen to uphold community values, and she repaid them with vanity, sabotage, and stolen benches. For me, it was personal, not just because I caught her in the act, but because I'd poured hours into helping build the emergency system after the last blackout. And now all of it had nearly been undone by someone who believed appearances mattered more than people. But as one neighbor put it during a late-night walk, flashlight in hand and anger still fresh in his voice, at least now we know who she really was, and she'll never touch another pipe again. By Monday morning, Karen's downfall had officially graduated from neighborhood gossip to full-scale local news spectacle. A small-town news van rolled up and parked across the street from her house. A reporter stepping out with an umbrella in one hand and a camera crew trailing behind like sharks scenting blood in the water. What began as a bizarre HOA squabble had transformed into a legitimate story involving public safety violations, utility sabotage, and stolen city property. The neighborhood had become ground zero for a cautionary tale wrapped in absurdity. The irony: Karen always wanted the community to be famous for its landscaping and elevated standards. Now it was going viral for all the wrong reasons. The fire department returned that afternoon, this time not for an emergency, but to present an official statement. They confirmed that the gas line Karen had cut served not just the backup generator, but was part of a critical infrastructure loop tied into emergency services for the adjacent school zone. Because of the design and redundancy of the system, any interference on our end could have rippled outward, disabling emergency response systems citywide had the timing been worse. Luckily, the technicians had shut off the line before the pressure reached dangerous levels, but the city wasn't taking chances anymore. Karen's actions had officially triggered a re-evaluation of safety protocols across several nearby zones. In response, the utility company began immediate fortification of all surface-level infrastructure across the neighborhood. Bright orange barriers lined the sidewalk near Karen's home. Concrete enclosures and metal access locks were installed over every visible pipe, junction, or meter. It was a fortress now. What once annoyed Karen so much had become the very thing that would never bend to her again. They even installed motion-activated cameras with a small sign attached that read, "Smile for safety." No one said it aloud, but we all knew the hidden meaning. Smile, Karen. The HOA, energized and a bit vengeful, decided it was time to overhaul the entire community rulebook. Residents met in the clubhouse for what they dubbed the Reclamation Committee, a not-so-subtle jab at Karen's past beautification board. Suggestions poured in like floodwaters. Someone proposed that any resident found tampering with city or HOA equipment face a mandatory expulsion vote. Another suggested an annual review of HOA leadership with recorded minutes and public access. My personal favorite, the addition of a new rule that no one could unilaterally remove or alter any communal item without a minimum of 3 signatures from different property owners and a city permit, if applicable. But the most cathartic moment came when the utility company arranged a special demonstration at the clubhouse lawn. They set up a dummy gas line, complete with bright yellow warnings, and gave a brief talk on public safety, followed by a ribbon-cutting ceremony for the newly enclosed generator. The twist? The ribbon was floral printed, matching Karen's infamous blouse from the surveillance footage, and the oversized scissors were painted gold. The whole thing was part educational, part symbolic exorcism. When the mayor herself attended and shook my hand for helping avert a disaster, I almost laughed. Only in suburbia could a gas line sabotage end in a civic celebration with lemonade stands. While all this unfolded, Karen remained in her house like a ghost trapped behind blinds. She stopped answering the door, her porch packages piling up untouched, and rumors swirled that she deactivated her social media accounts after being relentlessly tagged in memes. My personal favorite showed a before and after image. On the left, Karen grinning in front of a well-manicured lawn, and on the right, the exploded view of a city map labeled "Systems that almost failed because Karen had a vision." It made the front page of the community newsletter. Things hit a new level when we received a notice that Karen's property was being formally investigated by city officials for unauthorized modifications. Apparently, during a deeper inspection, it was discovered that the van found behind her home had been registered under a fake business name, Neighborhood Maintenance Solutions. No such business existed, and the van had no inspection records or legal registration. Even worse, several items recovered from the van were listed as lost from unrelated city departments, meaning Karen had been hoarding not just HOA materials, but potentially city-wide assets. No one could figure out how she collected so much without being noticed. The city held a special meeting to discuss charges. The phrase "felony theft of municipal property" was uttered with grave tones. Karen, now facing mounting legal pressure, finally left her house for a brief moment, clad in oversized sunglasses and a scarf like a celebrity caught in scandal. She drove out of the neighborhood flanked by what appeared to be two paralelos. She didn't wave, didn't look at anyone, just gunned her car down the street like she was fleeing a movie set. That night, someone updated the community whiteboard near the clubhouse. Usually, it listed events like yoga on the lawn or pothole repairs. This time, scrolled in bold marker, "Karen has left the building and possibly the state. Emergency meeting on Thursday to discuss hallway leadership transition." No one erased it for days. It became a photo spot for residents. People posed next to it with coffee cups, peace signs, even their dogs. Meanwhile, the neighborhood had begun to transform. Freed from Karen's nitpicking rule, residents added porch swings, backyard fairy lights, and even a new mural on the community center wall. It featured a winding golden pipeline stretching across a blue sky, with a superhero figure labeled "Civic Duty" holding back a flood of scissors. It was a playful, cathartic tribute to what we'd survived. But the most unexpected gesture came from the fire department. They returned one final time, this time not for business but to present a thank you gift to the neighborhood. A polished steel plaque was mounted on the generator's new enclosure reading, "In honor of those who value safety over appearances. This generator saved lives. Don't cut corners." It was signed by the Chief of Emergency Services and dated with the day Karen had made her fateful snip. As for me, I was just glad the neighborhood could finally sleep through a storm without fear. I'd had my fair share of battles with Karen before, but this one proved something bigger, that sometimes the enemy isn't loud or openly malicious. Sometimes it's the person who thinks they know best and acts without asking, who mistakes control for care, and whose vision of perfection is blind to the chaos it causes. Karen had ruled with aesthetic tyranny, but now we had security, laughter, a running generator, and a community finally running itself. Spring rolled into summer, and with it came the long overdue feeling of peace. The sun didn't just rise over our neighborhood anymore. It warmed it, lit it up, gave it color again. No more cold glances over hedges or whispered complaints about lawn gnomes. Without Karen patrolling the sidewalks like a self-appointed aesthetic enforcer, people began to relax. The atmosphere softened. Porches gained wind chimes. Front yards sprouted eclectic touches. Birdhouses, tire swings, even a whimsical mailbox shaped like a goose that Karen would have reported 6 times over. But the biggest change wasn't in the decor. It was in how neighbors looked at each other, like we'd all just come through a hurricane and were finally safe to step outside again. The HOA, under new leadership, embraced the shift. The new president, Olivia Winters, was a retired fire chief with a backbone of steel and a laugh loud enough to scare away any remnants of Karen's policies. Olivia didn't care about hedge height. She cared about resilience, about safety, about building trust. One of her first moves was forming an actual emergency response committee, something Karen had always resisted because storms make the shrubs messy. Now we had an organized communication system, backup medical supply storage at the community center, and CPR training scheduled every quarter. It turned out when the drama stopped, real progress started. The community decided to throw a block party in honor of Neighborhood Recovery Month. No official name existed for such a thing, but we all agreed we earned it. Banners went up, food trucks lined the street, kids ran around with glow sticks and sticky cotton candy fingers. We screened a movie on the clubhouse lawn using a projector powered by, you guessed it, the newly reinforced backup generator. The same generator Karen once called a noisy, overbuilt monstrosity now hummed proudly behind a reinforced steel cage, its top crowned with a small motion light and a polished plaque that still made passers-by pause and smile. That night, as I helped string lights between the oak trees lining the clubhouse parking lot, I overheard one of the older residents talking to a group of newcomers. They were pointing toward the generator enclosure, admiring the upgrades. The old man, Marcus, leaned in like he was sharing a ghost story. That there, he said, nearly blew because a lady with gardening shears wanted a prettier sidewalk. Snipped it like she was trimming roses. Whole neighborhood almost went dark forever. The newcomers gasped, then laughed. One of them shook their head and said, "You're kidding, right?" Marcus just tapped his nose and walked off with a grin. The story had become legend, a cautionary tale, a punchline. Karen's name was now a verb. Don't go full Karen on it, people would say if someone overstepped. Even city officials seemed to catch on. The utility company used our neighborhood as a case study in training modules. We were featured in a newsletter titled How to Protect Community Infrastructure from Itself. There was even talk of a short segment on the local PBS affiliate about grassroots recovery after civic sabotage. Karen had always wanted our community to be showcased. She just never imagined it would be for surviving her. A week after the party, I was out watering the plants along my side fence when I saw something curious. A moving truck. Karen's house, empty for weeks, was being cleared out. Furniture, boxes, a broken garden gnome, the one she once confiscated from a neighbor and never returned. No one had seen her since that scarf-wrapped drive out of the neighborhood, and rumor had it she'd been charged with multiple counts of tampering with public property. A court date had been scheduled. Fines were expected. Some said jail time was possible. But most people didn't care about that anymore. They were just glad she was gone. What no one expected was what came next. That weekend, I got a knock at my door. It was Olivia, holding a box with my name written on the top in bold black marker. "Found this in the HOA storage shed," she said. "Figured you should be the one to open it." Inside the box was a stack of old paperwork, blueprints, emails, HOA minutes going back nearly 5 years, and under it all, a folder labeled Neighborhood Improvement Proposals, Rejected. It was a treasure trove of ideas that Karen had vetoed over the years. A community garden plan, a little free library box, a walking trail extension. All perfectly good, all shut down because they didn't meet her standards. Olivia asked if I'd like to head up a new committee, one focused on community development. I said yes without even thinking. It felt full circle. The guy who caught Karen snipping the gas line was now being asked to help grow something real, something better. That same day, a final touch was added to the generator enclosure. A wooden sign, handcrafted by one of the residents, mounted to the side of the steel cage. It read, "This line survived Karen." Simple, honest, perfect. People stopped to take pictures with it. Some laughed, some nodded, but everyone understood it wasn't just about the gas line. It was about what we'd all endured and how a neighborhood that almost crumbled under the weight of one person's vanity came back stronger because it stood together. By summer's end, the neighborhood had not just healed, it had evolved. People shared tools. Kids made lemonade stands without someone demanding permits. A new mural went up near the community park. This one, painted by teenagers and local artists, showed a cartoon generator with a cape blocking a pair of scissors labeled Petty Authority. At the bottom was a line that summed up everything we'd learned. Power comes from community, not control. Sometimes I still think about the day I found Karen cutting that gas line. How surreal it was, how one absurd moment with a pair of scissors led to power outages, emergency meetings, a media circus, and eventually, real change. In the end, she gave us what she never intended: unity, not through leadership or inspiration, but through chaos. We built something better because we had to, because we saw what could happen when someone confuses domination with improvement, because we finally remembered what community is supposed to mean. And now, every time I walk past that generator, see that wooden sign, and hear its steady hum, I don't just hear backup power. I hear the echo of what we went through. I hear laughter, resilience, and the low murmur of a neighborhood that finally found its voice. And I smile, knowing that no matter how strong the storm or how sharp the scissors, we're stronger.